Welcome to the Room of Lives. I am your host, Neil. In this part of my conversation with Pace Davis, we discuss contemporary intellectual leaders. In today's world, atheist rationalists like Sam Harris have replaced religious heads as thought leaders. What is driving young people, especially men, to flock to these thought leaders? Should we defer to them for all the spheres that they speak on? Or do they have their blind spots as well? If you enjoy listening to this conversation, consider supporting me by donating DAI or Ether to abhranil.eth. That's ABHRANIL.ETH. So you wanted to talk about the thought leaders of the current day and why people are flocking to them. So I'm very interested in this.
I guess it started for me, I guess I'll talk personally my story. I think, I've had this idea since so I stopped believing in God when I was a child. And I remember my first year at college.
How old were you, by the way?
6 or 7.
Okay.
So pretty young.
Yeah. Me too.
And I remember just thinking, this is a joke. It's not real.
Yeah.
And when I got to college, I remember my first week at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I was walking down the hallway in one of the buildings, and I saw to a criminal justice class, and I saw a flyer that said "Atheist Agenda" meeting Tuesdays or something.
What?
Atheist Agenda.
Atheist Agenda.
Meeting Tuesdays. And I turned to my friend and I said, "Why the fuck would atheists need to meet? They're atheists. That's the whole point. You got rid of God. Now you don't need to go to church. So you have no reason to meet. Isn't that the point of being an atheist?" And he was like, "I don't know." And so I remember thinking to myself, why would atheists need to get together? What would be the point? And I think this was before I was aware of Richard Dawkins, guys like Sam Harris, these people that ended up becoming these, I don't know, kind of fill-ins, right, for religious figures, right? And then now there's what's his name? We just talked about him in the
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson, right? And Joe Rogan, right? And at the time, I thought, because I think I don't know if it's the kind of the visions I've had of bullying and justice or whatever, but I've always been really opposed to the cult of personality. I've never really been drawn to believe that people have more to offer than they might have to offer. So I can think that person's movie is incredible and they could be a totally terrible person and I could never want to meet them, but they have good movies. But I think what I've seen too is that there's a lot of instead of this idea of if you like someone's movies, you want to like them as a person, or if you like their novels, you want them to have been a decent person as well. And I don't particularly find that to be important for me personally. And so I think when I stopped believing in God, I thought to myself, well, why would I ever want to talk about? Isn't the absence of God the wonderful absence of having to talk about something? And so I didn't go around debating atheism. I never, even friends and I would discuss it, and they would say why don't you believe? And I was like, I just don't. I don't really care about it. That's actually why I don't believe, because I don't think about it. That's one of the reasons, right? And I think that there's other people who and maybe it's their religious experience was different, but they really want to explain why they don't believe. They need you to know, right? And so that was the first time I ever remember noticing that thought in my mind of what an interesting gap to fill. Maybe it's this gap of religion, maybe it's this gap of community, maybe it's the space family used to fill, but now it seems like it's filled by these new talking heads, these new figures. And so I noticed as, I like to read kind of, I like to read Reddit, I try to follow kind of intellectual trails. But I noticed more and more often they were leading back to people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, especially among men. And I guess I exclusively mean among men. No woman ever linked me to a Sam Harris podcast.
Okay.
But they kept leading back. And, there's this appeal, right? They come off as these very rational people. And as the election was, kind of coming near, right? There was this there were these fears around who was going to win. And then Donald Trump won. And there was this kind of almost hysteria around Donald Trump winning. And then there was like this, and then I felt like there was an intellectual push even more to follow people like Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris as the real, reasonable people now. In an unreasonable world, these were kind of the new these were the new thought leaders of our generation. And so I looked into Jordan Peterson, and I thought, okay, well, Jordan Peterson sounds like he has knowledge on a topic, which is psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And then he seems like he has very little knowledge on almost all other topics, right? Like he doesn't jump out as an incredibly wise person. I mean, he makes basic proclamations about how to live your day, which is to make a list of things to do and do it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is like, not particularly new advice.
Mm-hmm.
It's not original. And so I thought, okay, that's interesting. But I found, and then Sam Harris, I've heard him have some really interesting guests. He seems well read in philosophy. I really enjoyed his Robert Sapolsky episode with neuroendocrinologist Robert Sapolsky. And then I listened to his opinion on Palestine, and I thought, Jesus, this is a garbage opinion that was formed with garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And then I listened to his opinion on Islam, and I thought, again, this is like kind of a garbage. And it's hard to tell if he's trying to appeal to his audience, or if he's actually has the blind spots that are that large. But I think I kept like running into these thought leaders. What I found was odd is that when I would encounter someone in public, again, almost always a man, that they would quote Jordan Peterson or Sam Harris, and they would almost deify them. Like they were not just these like people who wrote a book, who had an opinion that was valid, and they were capable of having totally invalid opinions about every other topic, right? They were bigger. They were better than that. They were like smarter. They were truly telling us how to live our lives, and they were like the only reasonable people. And even Joe Rogan is looked at as this. He's looked up to, right? Or Tim Ferriss, the 4-Hour Workweek, right? People don't say like Tim Ferriss had a good idea. They say like, oh my God, have you ever heard Tim Ferriss? And it's not like they don't talk specifically about the topic. And for example, Joe Rogan. I mean, Joe Rogan's success is Joe Rogan says wow a lot. And I think that's a really smart tactic. He doesn't endorse the opinions of his guests, which is an intelligent thing to do. He invites guests on and then just says like, whoa, wow, really, tell me more. Whoa, wow, keep going. Oh, you only eat ground beef, Jordan Peterson. Explain how intelligent that is. And he doesn't say like, oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to eat ground beef. He says like, keep talking about the fact that you only eat ground beef. Like, I want to hear more about this. But people look at Joe Rogan also as like this like, fantastical person, right? And so I guess I just like, I think I became more and more concerned with like what is driving particularly men. And I mean I don't see this happening as much like in the same way, right? What is particularly driving men in America who are intelligent, right? And it doesn't mean they're intelligent on everything. It means they are just intelligent people, educated men, right? In cities and urban areas to flock to people like this as their thought leaders. Why do they need to identify with these individuals? And is it that the religion has disappeared and they need to identify with something, or is it that they feel like under siege somehow, or like their power is slipping, and these are the people that are telling them they're going to be safe?
Do you think that there is some correlation between the people that you see flocking to these thought leaders and having a lack of traditional religious belief?
Yeah, I don't ever remember encountering a conversation with than someone talking about their like church services they go to, But I also like, I'm not sure if none of them are religious or if those aren't conversations. But I think I've been surprised at the thoughtfulness. So because like so there are people that could mention Jordan Peterson. I go, that makes perfect sense that you think Jordan Peterson's amazing. Like you also sound like you hate women every time you talk about women, right? But there are really thoughtful people that will talk about Jordan Peterson to me that seem to have on many issues delicate opinions, right? They seem to have the ability to have a lot of conflicting views in their head at the same time, and to try to find the way through, right? To find a kind of capital T truth in the sea of all of the smaller truths. But and so I think that it's like it's borderline alarming actually how much airplay some of these people get, and how well they're respected despite their glaring blind spots. And I am not saying they can't be respected for the things they were right about or are seemingly right about. But it's like interesting, like people who listen to Sam Harris about one topic may also listen to his opinions on Islam. And and Sam Harris is a man who literally asked his guest on his podcast if Huma Abedin, who is Clinton's aide, might be a long-term like Islamic insurgent who'd been conning. Wait, to give it back on, Huma Abedin was married to Anthony Weiner, right? Anthony Weiner, the famous penis pictures like sexter. Anthony Weiner is Anthony Weiner is Jewish. Anthony Weiner is an ardent supporter of Israel, right? Anthony Weiner is a vocal supporter of Israel, right? Huma Abedin was his wife. Huma Abedin family is Muslim. Huma Abedin marries. Okay, so first off, Huma Abedin is a Muslim woman who is married outside of her faith, which is not allowed. The reverse is allowed. Muslim women or Christian and Jewish women are allowed to marry Muslim men. The others are haven't. She's still alive, and her mother, he argues, is tied in some way to Islamicists. I don't actually know anything about her.
You're saying Sam Harris argues.
Sam Harris argues Huma Abedin's mother is tied to Islamicism.
Yeah.
Right? And so he actually asks the guest on his show if she's a long con. He says, like, oh, is this just crazy for me to think? Or is it like maybe she's secretly an Islamicist and she's like one of the smartest Islamicists ever? And you think about that, like that statement, I mean, I can't imagine you making that statement about another topic, about another religion, right? And maintaining your public standing, right? I mean, he's not saying like Huma Abedin wrote an email that said like Muslims will rule the world one day, I can't wait. She literally married a Jewish man outside of her faith, and her mother has some ties, according to him. I don't even know what those ties are, but is a Muslim basically, right? Like, and maybe also is part of an Islamic party, right? And he's literally asking, I guess, the question of like, is this a long con? Is she a sleeper cell? So this isn't, and he always portrays it as like, I'm just telling the truth. I just need people to understand that Muslims really are scary. But it's like, you know, I heard that and I thought to myself, and people who respect his other opinions are coming to this podcast and actually taking this seriously because they know nothing about Islam. They know nothing about Huma Abedin, right? They know nothing about the situation at hand. And so I think one of my concerns, like with that kind of these thought leaders, Richard Dawkins, right, or Bill Maher is a great example. I think a lot of liberals love Bill Maher because he's like the hard talking liberal.
Yeah, I don't think of him as a particularly intelligent person to begin with.
Bill Maher? Yeah, I mean,
anyway.
Yeah, but people look to him for their sense of like, you know, worth and sense of self and sense of identity, right? And I think that, you know, just I guess my question is like, what is the search for identity specifically among men, right? Because like that's who I think this is all appealing to. I don't think Sam Harris has a large female audience. I don't think Jordan Peterson has a female audience, particularly, right? Despite the fact that they both say they do. What is this? What culturally what does it indicate? Is it like the fear of men? Is it the need for identity? Is it the lack of religion? Is the fear that the seas are changing and that to be a man is no longer? And I don't even think men would say it's no longer advantageous. I think what many men would say is like it's now dangerous to be a man. I think that's the way I would describe it. I don't think it would be like we once had it so good and we had all of these advantages and now we're simply having to share those advantages and therefore they are going away. I feel like what you would instead hear is like, it's so risky to be a man out there, you say the wrong thing, it's over. Because that's the way Sam Harris talks about it. He's like, you make one misstep and your career's over. And I think that has happened. I don't think it's happened to Sam Harris. I think Sam Harris is a millionaire despite the things he said, right? Or actually maybe because of the things he said, right? So I think that he would be exaggerating greatly, specifically talking about himself. And Jordan Peterson, you know, pretends that he's persecuted, but Jordan Peterson obviously loves the spotlight, obviously loves being able to go around and give speeches, obviously loves being adored. And so it's not like Jordan Peterson was like, I got attacked online and I shied away from the public eye. He was like, I got attacked online and I'm going full steam. I want to get attacked some more. I guess, I don't know, just that's been on my mind, just this idea of what does it indicate about. And you know, we earlier were talking in the living room about this idea of like Facebook news feeds and being catered to, you know, to a certain intellectual view. Is it simply that if you go down that rabbit hole at all, right? Like one of the people we're talking to is like, how many videos do you have to watch that are conservative before you see a Nazi video, right? Like is the algorithm writing of YouTube or is the SEO writing of Jordan Peterson supporters so good that if you search 2 searches about a man being like accused of sexual assault falsely, are you then automatically part of Jordan Peterson's video? You know, like, is that where you go, right? Or do you go into like Nazi stuff? Or like, what, how are men getting so pulled into this? Because people will casually say like, "Oh, I read his 12 rules to live by," and it's gospel. It's like that's a poorly rehashed version of philosophers for, millennia, right? Like that's been basically said better.
But those philosophers are not on current TV and media presenting themselves with so much force. So I think a lot of it has to do with kind of the force of personality. I definitely think that is true for Bill Maher.
Yeah.
That he has a lot of momentum and force.
Yeah.
And people sit up and take notice.
Yeah.
And in some ways people want to have that force within themselves. So like, this is what I want for myself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, maybe sometimes the exact arguments kind of take a backseat.
Yeah. And they just want a leader.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe we actually truly do enjoy like authoritarian figures. Maybe we do enjoy like the kind of like the certain politician. We're driven to the person that tells us things are going to change. We're not really. A lot of people aren't driven to like the softly spoken politician who's like, I'm going to go try to talk to some people about making some policy, and we're going to see if they agree. No one votes for that guy. They vote for the for the veto or the and I think they follow the Sam Harris, who's certain that Islam is evil, and he's telling you, he knows.
So you mentioned these thought leaders that are influencing, in your mind, mostly men.
Yeah.
Have you thought about? Can you think of any contemporary thought leaders for women, and are there any shared features, and what are the differences?
So it's weird. I don't like. I mean, obviously, okay. So I think there are thought leaders. I think generationally, I would say like listening to people, my mother's age, right? You get like there's always been like the kind of like the Michelle Obama, kind of Oprah Winfrey, Hillary Clinton kind of age, right? For younger, the only person that I feel like I hear referenced by like a larger breadth of women is Brene Brown. Okay. University of Houston. Okay. She basically writes a lot about like love and and I haven't read her work, but I was just like
and like vulnerability.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I remember now. Someone mentioned.
Yeah. But it is interesting that she's quite a different thought leader, and that she's like actually writing about exposing herself and searching and like in what seems like a not a list of you do this and you get to be a successable alpha man who owns the world. It's instead like you have to fall apart and then try to work yourself back together. And I feel like that's like I don't know of other thought leaders, and I think that that's interesting. I think that's like I don't feel like I hear
that very fact is kind of interesting. Then you go around and ask any person whether they're a man or a woman to name some contemporary thought leaders, and if they're well read and they've been reading this stuff, I don't think a lot of female names are going to pop up.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of feels like one of those questions of am I just like not exposed to these conversations that women are having at all, or is it and that may very well be the case, right? It may be that like I'm not exposed to them because I either don't ask or I'm not I'm not listening or whatever, right? Like that's always possible. The other factor would be like also like it seems like at least one of the feelings I get is that there's less need to have someone who's telling you exactly how you're going to succeed and dominate, which is like interesting because I think that it doesn't have to be contemporary, but thought leaders in America are often people that tell you how you're going to dominate, right? Like they can cast it in this gentle way. Like Sam Harris has a soft voice, and he acts like he's like open to all kinds of opinions, but he's telling you something with absolute certainty usually, So I wonder that that's also part of it. Like Brene Brown isn't telling you how you're going to dominate your family or your life. She's not telling you how you're going to climb in the the tech ladder. Yeah. So that's also, and that's why I say like generally when I read female authors, like you get less of that. Like crush and dominate. You just get less of that. Not that there aren't any women that aren't admired for that. I mean, some women are admired for that aspect of their personality.
Yeah. So I was actually very influenced by my first exposure to Sam Harris's ideas. This was back in the time when I had heard nothing else about him. No political stuff, nothing about Islam. I had never seen him, like he hadn't really emerged on the media.
Yeah.
And I kind of forget now who recommended this book to me, but it was a book that had nothing to do with any politics or Islam or any of this stuff. And it was a book called Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. And I was a big fan of that book, and I'll stand by it even today. Like, I think it kind of catalyzed a transformation in my life a couple of years after I came to graduate school, in a way that I started to value spirituality and religion after many, many years of just being a kind of increasingly militant atheist. And then Sam Harris started to pop up in many other places. And I started seeing mentions of him as an Islamophobe. Like, I don't know any of this stuff. What is going on here? And when I started to learn a little bit more about the other stuff, at some point I kind of decided that in the beginning I would be kind of defensive about him, because this book that I read was almost the entire picture of Sam Harris that I had in my head. I was like, oh, it must be everything that I'm hearing, it must be kind of taken out of context or whatever, because I know that this guy isn't like that. In fact, you guys haven't read the book. Like, this guy, like, this book made me consider seriously spirituality, and he's not really the militant atheist kind of grumpy person that you're. But then at some point I kind of decided that this is not really my business to defend him as a person. The story ends that I read something about him and that I really value it, and it's a completely different world from what the other stuff that he's saying. Sometimes there's absolutely no connection between the stuff that he wrote in this book and the stuff that he's written in other books. And it's not really my business or my responsibility to go around trying to defend the whole person, because I mean, what do I know what else he thinks about and how else he feels. It's been pretty peaceful since I made the decision. Like, I'm not going to have discussions with you about Sam Harris on any other topic than this one book that I really highly recommend. Well,
and that seems like that's the approach that would be ideal in ways to like many people, right? Is like they can have a valid idea, and then they can have a bunch of invalid ideas, or they can be like really useless outside of one field.
But I can see why it can be unsettling. Like, if you were taking not technical advice of how to solve this or fix this or answer this problem, but you're taking life advice from a person, you want to be able to kind of holistically look up to them. And therefore your identity gets vested in them, and you see that they did something, you find some sort of internal compulsion to try and make sure that, oh, no, it wasn't actually false. Because then if you find out that 70% of what this person is saying is kind of bullshit, but you will take the 30%, then you have to take it upon yourself to decide what is right and what is not. And it was kind of a relief to not have to do that in the first place when you found someone that, I can just trust this person, and I can just read, and I really like, and I'll do what they're telling me to do. So I think it's kind of not very hard to understand where that sentiment comes from in certain people. You have to have a certain degree of original thinking, and I would say a certain amount of courage to decide this is the only thing that I can take from this person, and then the rest is I kind of have to decide what is good and what is bad, and that can be a slightly more it's a harder path to walk, where you and not everyone can do it. That's why people just kind of look at these absolute sources of wisdom, so they don't have to worry about trying to figure things out for themselves.
That's a good point. I guess it's just it's hard. I think that it is worrying, right? Because you see people who are like in search of hope. Really, that's true. I think we can have all kinds of things they're in search for, but hope is probably a good word, at least in my estimation, for what most people are looking for. They're not looking for like doom and gloom and death, right? They're looking for someone to promise them a better future, whether that's through action on their part or that's through no action at all, and simply politically, right? People don't vote for candidates who are telling them how bad things are and that things are going to get worse. Or they'll say, unless you elect me, and then things get better, right? So people vote for hope. I think they'll do a lot of things based on hope, and I think people look for these intellectual guides based on hope, and so to find someone for spirituality is hopeful, right? But then the extension of that is like you're saying. So it's been an interesting thing I've encountered that I didn't. I don't think I expected to encounter. I guess I just hadn't thought much about it before. but the amount I encountered at the random run-ins with men, you know, maybe that's part of it, is like I talk to a lot of different people. I try to talk to a lot of different people I run into, men I run into about things they care about. And the number that mentioned Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, and over the last 15 years, the number mentioned Bill Maher. And I thought to myself, like, out of all the people to admire, like, you aren't saying, like, this person has one valid opinion. You're saying, like, wow, have you read anything by them? It's incredible. And so I think that just piqued my interest, and you know, something to kind of constantly think about is like, what's the correct response to that, and then what, you know, what is it, you know, as far as men go, like, what would be the way to offer that hope to men that was healthier, that I think would be like a healthier. So like if you know, not that I would, like, if I was to write, or if I was to make a podcast, or I was to talk about a subject, right? Say, like, how could you appeal to people who would experience spirituality for the first time and appreciate it, and also offer them like a, you know, like a Brene Brown kind of, you know, look internally, solve these like dilemmas, deal with these negative histories, and then like come out more hopeful and like more open to alternatives, instead of what I feel like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson offer, which is like, you feel hurt by life, right? And I think for many people, I think that, and I don't mean Sam Harris the spiritual side, I mean Sam Harris the like Islamophobic, kind of somewhat dogmatic, anti-leftist that he is. Same thing with Jordan Peterson, right? Is it seems like men have this feeling that society has outpaced them, not in a positive way, in a negative way. Social language has changed, and if they don't use the right words, if they're not perfect, or if they're not a robot, they'll be decimated. And that people like Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris offer them confirmation that they're actually right, that they are right, that this does happen, that men are being savaged everywhere, that men are losing their careers unfairly and being put in prison, and that Muslims really are evil, and that they've always been out to get us, and that at the end of the day, you just need to be righteous, and you will be vilified if you are righteous. And it's kind of an interesting thing, because it makes me wonder, is it like, is it so hard to look in the mirror, right? Because like, again, like, you can have 100 interactions, say like a man can have 100 interactions with women, right? And they can misstep in 1 or 5 of them, right? And they can look in the mirror and they could say like, I did misstep, I was wrong. Or they could actually say, well, 5 times I was called out, and 4 times I think I misstepped, and 1 time I didn't, and I'm righteous this 1 time, and the other 4 I'm not. Right? Like, but it seems like what Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson offer is like, you were never wrong, and if you do these things, you'll be so strong that you'll basically repel all the trash, and you'll like kind of gallop through life with your sword held high. And the same thing, it's like, I mean, I think it's a lot easier to hate Muslims than it is to look at the cost of our wars. I mean, like, I've argued with Pratim, you know, because Pratim, obviously, growing up in India, has a different view of Islam, right, than an American would, who really only encounters it in certain aspects. And I've encountered it in the ones, my experience. But I was saying, like, I think that one could make a very good argument, and a very persuasive argument, that if you were a Muslim in Yemen, or in Pakistan, or in Afghanistan, that you could actually look at the last 20 years of the history of the world regarding Muslims in the West, and you could come to the logical conclusion that the West was actually trying to destroy your religion, right? Because if you think about it, it's like, you can go from all the way west in northern Africa, you can go all the way east to the edge of Islam, right? And you can find wars that have been like waged and begun, right? And it's not that no Muslims have started fighting amongst each other. Like, Muslims have killed other Muslims far more than Muslims have attacked non-Muslims. But like, we have, the United States and European nations have been like kind of behind the scenes puppeteering or directly invading countries across the entire Muslim world. And then you could actually come to the logical conclusion that like, if you're a Muslim, you know that you are actually under attack for being Muslim. And
I think this is not simply a hypothetical idea. This is one of the actual lines of reasoning that possibly resonate among a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely among a lot of the people who are being recruited by more extremist organizations.
No, you're right, and the thing is they may be making a reasonable, logical argument, and so Sam Harris is like doesn't say like, they made a reasonable argument, now how do we create an alternative? which drives people back from that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of interesting because I can't tell if it's like the reason something like Sam Harris said or Jordan Peterson say about Islam resonates because it's easy to have an enemy, or if it resonates because the alternative would be actually looking at what we have done, and it would actually be blaming, like it might actually be putting terrorist attacks at the feet of the nations they're happening in. Like if you actually said, well, the British government did X, Y, and Z, and this has happened. This is the chickens coming home to roost. That's a very controversial thing to say. If you were to say like, well, we've been fucking around in the Muslim world for quite some time when 9/11 happened, right? Like, not that we deserve it. It's not about desserts, right? It's not about like this is the justice, right? It wasn't justice, but to say like an outspring of this kind of meddling in a region may actually be terrorism, or or saying like when you don't have a nation state, like obviously they were trying to create the Islamic State, right? But when you don't actually have a nation state to make war from, right? Or if in the case of like terrorist organizations, if they were to take over a whole nation, they would be immediately invaded and everyone would be killed. So they're simply making war like a nation would, but they can't do it as a nation or whatever, right? And that's the way they're thinking of it. And the way we think of it is that nations are righteous and they don't commit terrorism. They go to war. And anything that's not a nation is a terrorist. Or whoever is the loser is a terrorist. I mean, that's also one of the ways you can think about it, right? Palestinians are terrorists. Israelis they're military. So we talk about the Israeli military as if a command from a military commander is different than a command from your paramilitary organization commander, as if one is inherently more moral than the other. So anyway, yeah, but that's off topic and back to politics. But anyways, is it that looking at the reality that might have created Islamic terrorism, that might have grown Islamic terrorism, is it more painful to do that than it is to say like, look, they're just out to get us all?
Thanks for joining us in our conversation today. In the next part, Pace tells us about being the first human diagnosed with a disease of nerves and muscles that had previously only been studied in other animals.